Good evening, everyone in Alberta, Canada, and beyond. It is Wednesday, July 3rd, 2024, and I'm Kerry Lambert, and I welcome you to an evening of Solutions for a New Alberta brought to you by the Alberta Prosperity Project, also known as APP. I hope everyone had a great Canada Day, July 1st, and I hope our neighbors to the south will have a great July 4th Independence Day tomorrow. APP's purpose is to educate, inspire, and unite all Albertans, businesses, and organizations to protect their prosperity, individual freedoms, rights, and self-determination by empowering the Alberta government to restructure Alberta's relationship within or without Canada. Of course, we wouldn't be able to do this without your help, and if you can, please share this webinar. Tonight's sponsor is a bit of a story, so if you don't mind sitting back, maybe have a bit of a Canada Dry in front of you, like I am. Canada Dry is not our sponsor tonight. This weekend, we celebrated Canada Day at the Whistle Stop in Mere, Alberta. The forecast, much like all of Alberta, was for rain. And I hosted karaoke there, so we ended up setting up in a tent. But it didn't rain. It was a beautiful Sunday night. And then on Monday, July 1st, it was supposed to rain again. So we set up the stage for our musicians to play in just in case it did rain. The equipment was set up for a quick move and cover up, but it didn't rain again. It was gorgeous. It was 23 degrees Celsius and sunny. I got a burn on my face, which I don't mind, actually. We had musicians Jay Burns and Ruth Purvis-Smith play, and of course, Tamara Litch and her band Blind Monday, and it was absolutely awesome. We had vendors set up, selling lots of different items. It's always a pleasure seeing all the different vendors there. As well as we had a table for signing up for APP's referendum and the pension referendum. And of course, we did karaoke again on Monday night just because I just wasn't tired enough. I'd like to thank everyone who attended. It was great seeing your smiling faces, walking up and hearing your enthusiasm, and of course, all the flags as well. But I'd like to thank some of the volunteers who did help out and were able to set up things just in case it did rain. And I'm sure I'll forget some names because that's what I do. So please excuse me, but I'd like to thank Shane, Kurt, Chris. No, not Chris Scott. He was flipping burgers, but Chris knows who he is. I'd like to thank Joe, Pam, Annie from Scotland, and of course, Jess and Vicky. And I'd also like to thank Christine. Christine is our sponsor tonight. She has an art studio and does custom framing. And I'll just show her site up here. Her site is heikoaura.com, and I'll put that on the screen as well. And I wanted to show you some of the amazing prints that she does tonight. So again, go check her out if you want some artwork done and some custom framing. If you go under prints for sale, she has a whole series of prints that she's done on the Freedom Convoy. She has one from Coots. She has a few from Ottawa. This one is near and dear to my heart. This was actually my view from the picker truck when Chris and I were driving out to Ottawa. So of course I had to have that one. I just had to have that one. We also have the picker truck as well, pulling into Ottawa, and Big Red, and a lot of other ones. But I wanted to show you the print that I ended up getting this weekend. And it is Ottawa on the hill, Parliament Hill. And it's a little bit more difficult for me to see. But the reason this one is so special to me is because that is the tent where we were queuing up all the speakers and the even the music and the entertainment. And that was the big DJ video screen. And if you look really, really close, there's a guy there. I like to think that's me. So it probably wasn't me. But so anyways, you can even buy that one online as well. And let me just show you that one up online. You can go and buy that print as well. So again, Christine, thank you so much for helping out this weekend. Amazing. And if you do go and manage to buy a print, just tell Christine that I sent her. I sent you her way. That would be amazing. As we go back away from our sponsor, we'll go back into talking about a little bit more about APP and what we're doing this summer. APP memberships are 1 year for $20, 2 years for $30, 3 years for $40, or you can make a donation and you can go to albertaprosperityproject.com. We do, of course, talk about our Support 5 555, where you do 5 minutes a week on social media, liking, sharing, commenting on our posts, recruiting 5 new supporting monthly members. That, of course, grows our community strength and reach and network. And a $5 monthly donation, if at all possible, to fuel our initiatives, empowering us to plan effectively and push forward towards our goals. We are doing door knocking this summer, and you can always get a hold of us at contact@albertaprosperity.com. We are definitely going to be looking for volunteers for that, as well as the other side thing that we're doing is helping out the Alberta Pension Plan. And the Alberta Pension Plan Tour, of course, is on right here, albertapension.ca. And there are some events going on, but for the most part, what we've got is online town halls. We're doing every second Tuesday. So we've already done one last Tuesday. We're going to do another one next Tuesday. And then every second Tuesday, we have Tanner Naday and Mitch Sylvester that will be helping us out on the majority of those. But I know there'll also be other speakers that are going to be coming in. If you do want us to come out and do an event, please just get a hold of us through the contact form at albertafirstpension.ca. As well, we are going to be walking around and doing some Stampede breakfast this year. And we're not exactly sure. We're still going through the schedule. But what I want to do is just kind of show you. If you go to this, stampedebreakfast.ca, you can probably find a Stampede breakfast near you in Calgary. Of course, maybe we'll do them outside of Calgary. I'm not sure. I know Airdrie and Chestermere, they do their own, and maybe Okotoks, and I'm not even sure. But anyways, that's basically where you could go and find out. And we will also be posting those on the albertafirstpension.ca. I think that's all I need to talk about right now. Yeah, I think that's all I need to talk about. Thanks for letting me ramble for 11 and a half minutes, people. But this, I ended up having to rewatch this video of our replay for tonight's webinar, because it is such a good recap of what's actually happened in the last, well, let's say 16 months. Tonight's episode is a replay from February 2023, and it's called Lockdowns, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, 50-Minute Cities. And it's with Michelle Stirling from Friends of Science. Of course, the reason we're doing this is after Edmonton's announcements of their 15-minute cities plan, I thought it'd be a good idea to replay this and discuss the timelines of some events and targets, which include smart cities and concerns over digital ID. Of course, I do like going back in time and seeing where we've come from in these webinars, and maybe it'll help us determine where we're going. And even though this is a replay, I'm still here to take comments and questions. So please put 3 question marks before your question so I can flag it. We'll have a discussion after the replay. And with that, I'll now begin the replay. And thanks for watching. And don't forget, share, share, share. As I turn myself off, let's see if I can get this working. Hello, Michelle.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me on the show, Carrie.
Awesome, excellent. So Michelle's actually done a few webinars for Alberta Prosperity Project. One was called A Tipping Point, and it was about the tar sands and all the dirty oil and all that. And then and basically it was I guess saying that CBC was ill quoted on the whole documentary on what they did. And then you also did another one. It was called Cruel and Unusual Punishment, and it was about climate change, and it was a rebuttal again to more misinformation, or at least trying to set the record straight on what's actually happening with climate change. So
yes, and challenging the federal government's healthy economy, healthy environment plan.
Yeah, that's right. So today, of course, we are talking about lockdowns and the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and the buzzword that has certainly been on at least for the last week or two are these 15-minute cities, right? So I'll just quickly go through Michelle's little bio here. She is.
You can shorten it.
It is short. It's fairly short. She's with Friends of Science. She is the top 10 downloaded author for several weeks on SSRN. What is Science?
Social Science Research Network.
There you go. Perfect. She's a member of the Canadian Association of Journalists. She does freelance op-ed contributor, blogger, throughout things, scriptwriter, you're a public speaker, author. We just said that. Business value. You're like a Renaissance woman. That's what you are. And Renaissance woman in science for sure. Absolutely. So yeah, you've got lots of lots of experience in talking and researching. So again, thank you so much for coming on. So let's how do you want to start this? Like, because I mean, it's such a broad subject. Do you want to do a little bit of a talk before? Or do you want to just jump right into your presentation? Because I know you've got some slides that you want to show.
Well, I think that we should probably jump in because I do have quite a lot of slides, and I'm pulling together a lot of different angles on this. So it's not just hammering away on either lockdowns or 15-minute cities or the fourth industrial revolution. I'm trying to synthesize different aspects of this and show how the climate theme, ties them together, but drives other forces in the market.
Okay, let's do that then. So present that. There you are. So.
Yes, there I am. Okay, so away we go. So lockdowns, the door opener for the fourth industrial revolution and 15-minute cities. Now let's see what I mean by that. Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. One of the things we should be concerned about is the new abnormal, which is the rise of the biomedical security state. And I'm not the only person concerned about this. The more important person is Aaron Kheriaty, who is a psychiatrist in the US and a medical ethicist. And his book gives us a lot of insights. I'll be referring to a few of them tonight. Okay. So first of all, there's a confluence of very big events that no one's really talking about, and these are complicating some of the other issues related to climate change and economic development, even here in Alberta. So there's a global economic collapse in process. The mass boomer retirement and their health costs will be affecting all of us. There are collapsing demographics worldwide, especially in China, in North America, in OECD countries, which will mean a loss of the workforce and certain critical skills, and the loss of community volunteers. I'll get into the pension liabilities and an IMF report later. And this book by Peter Zehan is quite enlightening. So there are many problems facing us, and we're likely facing CBDCs, digital currencies.
Yes.
So climate change is a handy rationale for 15-minute cities. But in fact, the alleged climate emergency is based on outdated science and the misuse of a scenario called RCP 8.5. Urban planners hate cars. They hate parking for cars, roads, and your messy freedoms. And climate activists want a wartime command economy because they like that idea of rationing. And there's also the rise of the biomedical security state, which COVID and lockdowns tested and conditioned us. Now, climate change theory failed the test, but lockdowns and mandates successfully conditioned the public for 15-minute living. And also, surveillance and big data was gathered without normal privacy considerations, and the use of biomedical authority created a new abnormal. So this leads us to the fourth industrial revolution, because big tech has the digital solutions for the problems created by lockdowns just waiting for you. And we, the people, were just never really consulted about them. So almost all of these solutions are driven by the unsubstantiated need to reduce GHG emissions. And some of these ideas are helpful, but that some are just part of a sophisticated marketing scheme, which is inherent in climate ideologies, such as flying cars and drones. And furthermore, implementing most of them will lead to a biomedical security state. So if we jump back to 1989, we find that Bill McKibben had a vision of the future, which was that Americans would rarely travel. We'd experience the world through the internet. We'd grow our own food, power our communities with solar and wind, and divert our wealth to developing countries. And then we would be setting a moral example for China and that these countries would accept a grand bargain toward cleaner energy. So that sounds like lockdown to me.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to ask ourselves, have we already had climate lockdowns? Because a lot of the concern with 15-minute cities is that they would offer a platform for climate lockdowns. But let's look and see. I think we already had climate lockdowns. I'm going to go through a timeline here. So follow the years and the dates.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
2015, the Paris Accord was created. And Ivo de Boer, who was the executive secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the political climate body, said the only way that a 2015 agreement can achieve a 2-degree goal is to shut down the entire global economy. And the World Economic Forum gained Swiss host state status on December the 11th, 2015, and December the 12th, 2015, the Paris Agreement was signed. Now, that host state status is kind of like granting them a presence like the Red Cross. They were recognized sort of as a global, not just a global think tank, but like a global body like the Red Cross. And they also acquired some diplomatic immunities with that. Here we are, 2016. A report was issued called Deadline 2020. And this was for the Global C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group, which is about 100 cities with about 700 million citizens as of today. And these are some of the larger cities in the world, and they were all pulled together mostly by Michael Bloomberg, I think, as a lead figure. And they were told in this report, which was just written by this consulting group, by the way. It's not like people, elected officials, developed this. Anyway, that cities need to reduce their emissions from an annual average of above 5 tons CO2e per citizen to about 2.9. Now, you know, just for context, Canadians use about 17 tons CO2.
I was just going to ask, wow.
Yeah, so, you know, that's a pretty dramatic reduction. And here's their pie in the sky ideal, that they would be able to drop per capita emissions within cities ultimately to 0 by 2050. So, you know, most cities are designed around cars and mobilities. Cars require roads, maintenance and parking, and cars and transportation emit large amounts of GHGs, and so does consumption of goods. And urban planners especially hate short car trips. So to lower emissions, of course, cities must limit car transportation and personal consumption, and lockdowns did both. And I just saw another webinar the other day, and this fellow said that there are now 400 companies trying to develop flying cars.
Yeah. Wow.
And mobility is 38% of the global emissions. And he said that it's a $10 trillion opportunity. So you can see that.
Yeah.
Yes.
If they want to drop this down to like three tons per person. So what kind of makes, just to give a context, what is roughly, say, 1 ton? Is it driving in your car for a week or a month, or do you know?
You know, that's a good question. I should have looked that up before this.
I think,
but if you think it's 17 tons per capita per person in Canada, you know, it gives you a sense that you really have to be near the knuckle.
Basically, just think of it as driving around in your car for 1 month could be, say, 1 ton. And then, you know, so 12 tons for driving for 12 months.
Yes. Yeah, it would be a broader scope than that.
Yeah. But I had heard it's roughly half a ton to fly from Canada to Europe and back, I guess, is what it is. So, you know, if you're limited to only having 3 tons, that really means you may only be able to make 1 trip a year. That's if you can even get out of your 15-minute city. But we'll talk a little bit more about that too. Yeah.
Right. And Darshan Maharaja did the math for us on the idea of the Century Initiative, because while the government of Canada is asking everybody to cut emissions and forcing industries and individuals to cut emissions through the carbon tax and through other measures, they're also bringing in 400,000 people a year. And so They want to up the population of Canada to 100 million by 2100 in the Century Initiative.
Wow.
And you can see that, of course, we will never, ever meet any climate targets if we keep bringing in immigrants.
Yeah.
And that's not a comment on immigrants. It's a comment on carbon footprints.
Yeah, that's true.
So now September 2019, this came out. It's a very long PowerPoint called the Exponential Roadmap, which is supposedly telling us how to cut our emissions in half by 2030. Right after that came out in September, Mariana Mazzucato, who is the modern monetary theory economist, said in this op-ed, we need to act boldly now if we're to avoid economy-wide lockdowns to halt climate change. And in November 2019, right after that, the UNEP said we have to cut global emissions by 7.6% every year for the next decade to meet the Paris targets. So this was long before anyone was thinking about lockdowns, right? Mm-hmm. This was the fall of 2019. Mm-hmm. But then lockdowns happened. So, of course, the World Economic Forum thought it was fantastic. And they said, oh, emissions fell during lockdown. Let's keep it that way. And they even claimed that emissions fell by 17% in early April 2020 compared to 2019. So that sounds fantastic for all the people who think that humans cause climate change.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But the World Meteorological Organization in the fall of 2020 said that COVID-19 has no measurable impact on CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. And then they, kind of cave and say, but lockdown provided a platform to grow back better and take climate action.
Oh boy, wow, yeah.
Yeah, what a bunch of clowns, eh? And we issued this press release showing that lockdowns, net zero, and ESG policies won't stop climate change and will destroy lives. Mm-hmm. And one of our quotes is, the fact is the drop in emissions during COVID lockdowns is not enough to significantly affect the increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is far smaller than the random natural fluctuations. Hmm. So don't let your climate friends tell you that we should lock down again to save the planet.
Yeah.
And but the only organization that celebrated lockdowns was the World Economic Forum.
Of course.
And this was a disgusting little video. There was such an outcry that they actually pulled it. Hmm. Now, during lockdowns, you were under purposeful surveillance. Here in Canada, in the UK, some places in the US. So we know Canada's National Police Force were using spyware. The Public Health Agency tracked 33 million mobile devices. Mm-hmm. So, and there were also all kinds of nudge units and psychological behavioral psychology units working to get people to comply with various aspects of lockdown. And in the UK, they even have this big book of net zero principles for successful behavior change initiatives, because what they're trying to do is make everyone feel that they're personally responsible for climate change.
That's right.
And if you feel guilty, then you will not drive your car, you won't buy an avocado, you won't have a steak. Which reminds me, I'd love to have a steak after this. And, so you'll take these measures because of this nudge, nudge, nudge psychology, but these won't be your actual personal choices. Mm-hmm. You're being manipulated. Now, I don't know if people remember, but Google had an offshoot company, or actually it was Alphabet, called Sidewalk Labs, and they were going to build a smart city in Toronto. I don't know. Do people remember that?
I don't remember that. No.
Okay. Well, they had a lot of problems trying to get it together. Like it was about 12 acres of land. Yeah. And the problem was, like, it was a smart city and it would be a 15-minute city and very cool, with all kinds of Internet of Things and blah, blah, blah. But the big sticking point was privacy and data.
Oh, yeah, sure.
They just couldn't, none of their policies met the privacy laws of Canada.
Yeah.
And this is a very good book, which I just read, by a Globe and Mail journalist who wrote about the problems that they had in getting the thing together. Now, this was canceled in May 2020. The project was abruptly canceled. So they claimed that COVID was the issue. These are some of the privacy issues, and these privacy issues would be real issues in any smart city, 15-minute city as well.
Yeah.
So surveillance from the state and surveillance capitalism, that's where stores or corporations can use your data for their own ends, whether they be profitable or just to spy on you. Collection without valid consent, excessive collection of personal data, risk of a data breach, data monetization, lack of anonymity for differently abled persons, because when you collect data, even if you anonymize it, you can apparently also reverse engineer it. So it would be quite easy to say, oh, well, actually, the only person who uses a wheelchair ramp is that person, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
Loss of data sovereignty, and that was kind of an international issue between Canada and the States. And so the conclusion was that there's no social license without addressing privacy risks. Now, just before we go a bit further, we should remember that as of March 19th, 2020, COVID was not considered a high consequence infectious disease in the UK, meaning that theoretically there shouldn't have been a need for a lockdown. But Professor Lockdown and his scary COVID modeling opened the door to the Biomedical Surveillance Society, and emergency health edicts suspended normal civil privacy and charter rights. So all the things that Sidewalk Labs was tripping over all the time were wiped out of the way for big government by the emergency acts, right? Yeah. So that surveillance and all that authority went right out the window. All of our rights. Now, it's also important to note that in September of 2021, which was about 5 months before the Freedom Convoy, in the French press in Canada and Quebec, plans were floated for Emergency Measures Act for climate change. And they wanted to relate the fight against climate change and apply the fight against COVID and apply those same principles to climate change. So they thought they could have curfews, telework, border closures, and the pandemic has demonstrated that we can take rapid and radical measures. But is it a climate emergency?
And people will comply. That's all I was going to say.
Yes. Right? Yes. And regarding the 1 or 2 degrees Celsius delusion, this is the nephew of William Nordhaus, who is a Nobel Prize winning economist. He was the one who first proposed the 2 degrees Celsius target, but he just did it arbitrarily 40 years ago.
Just like 6 feet is just an arbitrary number.
That's right. Yeah. So, it's crazy to think that we're setting $1 trillion policy on these arbitrary figures. And we claim that we don't want to go above 1.5 degrees Celsius, but actually back in the day when James Hansen made his grand speech in the US in 1988, when this all began, he claimed the temperature was 15 degrees Celsius. Well, look at that. Looks like it's gone down. Right. So what's going on? Well, let's look and see it. Some other things that we do talk about, blah, blah, blah. Our house is on fire, Greta. And things that we don't talk about. We don't talk about net zero 2030. Is that climate or is it demography? Because in 2008, the first boomers reached the age of 62 and the last of them reached retirement age in 2031. Net zero 2050. Is it climate or is it a pension and employment crisis? So in the US, baby boomers made up about 22% of the US population, but by 2054, they'll account for less than 2% of the population. But during that period of time from 2030 to 2050, they will be drawing heavily on the healthcare industry. right?
Yeah.
And they won't be contributing to the tax pool, or in a very limited way.
That's
because they won't be working. Most of them won't be working anymore.
Yeah.
And in Canada, from 2021, boomers represent 24.9% of the Canadian population, compared with 41% when in 1966.
Yeah.
Where did the cursor go? There it is.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a significant shift in society. Now, one thing we don't talk about is the likelihood of COVID lockdowns not being for our health, but in fact as a cover for global economic collapse. And this is a quote from an article. Here's the article link. This is by Henri Lepage. He's a French economist, a very well-respected guy. This is one of his most translated books. But he says that on February the 20th, 2020, some yet unknown financial incident tipped the economy into a crash, one similar to the crash triggered by the events of August 2007. And he's not the only one saying that. There's this downloadable PDF from the Mises Institute, and they say the great crash of 2020 was not caused by a virus. It was precipitated by the virus and made worse by the crazed decision of governments around the world to shut down business and travel. But it was caused by economic fragility.
Wow. Yeah, because we've basically been told that, in February and March of 2020, the reason everything shut down was because of the virus.
Yeah. Well, these people hold a completely different view. And they say, they concede that it may have added to the collapse. It may have triggered the collapse, but the collapse was there. And it was already happening in the fall of 2019 because the overnight, what they call the repo market, nobody wanted to cover the gap between banks, which is explained further in that anatomy of a crash.
Yeah.
So, lockdowns and cell phone surveillance gave governments unprecedented data. So it was governments, likely using AI, were able to see what and who were necessary or unnecessary. They could see what kind of people or personalities complied with restrictions, who rejected it or fought back.
Mm-hmm.
The biomedical vaxport was introduced, and most cities introduced 15-minute concepts.
Yeah.
So, I don't know how many of our viewers live in cities, but maybe you can remember. I'm in Calgary. I remember they blocked off most of 8th Street.
That's right. Yep.
And, you could skateboard down 8th Street. There are a lot of restaurants, big open air, outdoor seating.
Yeah.
They instituted these fire pits,
yeah.
To try and create this sort of cozy neighborhood thing. Actually, they're one of the worst emitters of noxious air, but who cares? So you have to realize that cities have huge pension funds and municipal bonds, which likely suffered big hits during the unspoken of economic crash.
Yeah.
Now, again, I'm not a market expert on this, so that's a speculative comment on my part.
Yeah.
But maybe some of the viewers have more insights they could offer us.
That's a very interesting take on it, for sure. And you're right, because I remember when they did shut down Stephen Avenue, and then they even shut down one of the lanes for Memorial Drive. Right. And I remember, like, it was horrible to drive down Memorial, so you totally avoided that because you'd have people riding their bikes and walking, and I mean, it was great for them. But again, it's those were people that just wanted to get out of their houses and just get some fresh air. This was not the idea of the 15-minute city where I have to go into my dentist or I have to go to get groceries and they all have to be within walking distance, because to shut down Memorial wouldn't have made any sense at that point, because really there's nothing along Memorial other than a park.
But that's part of the 15-minute city, is that you have access to green space. And also, as you'll see, they gut the traditional structure of city streets and avenues.
Yeah. Okay.
So, is there a practical rationale for 15-minute cities? Because I have to say, in some of the comments, I have been accused of,
I should get my tinfoil. I gotta get my team. That's right. Yeah.
So, but there probably is in some cities. In some cities, that does make sense, and some cities already have it. Like I would say, my area of Bankview Beltline, because it is high density.
Yeah.
That is a walkable neighborhood. It is a 15-minute city within a city.
Yeah.
But you're not restricted. I mean, obviously, I can go to Chinook.
That's right.
I can go up to Westbrook. I can go up 14th Street, John Laurie Boulevard, whatever. So, very good, easy access out of that area if I want to drive or take the bus.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's look here. So 15-minute city was Amarjeet Sohi's election platform for Edmonton, but now it's a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Which is really funny.
Well, didn't a lot of these 15-minute city sort of concepts take place 5-10 years ago, like when they were actually even talking about them? So
it developed in Europe actually, and we'll get into that in a minute.
Okay.
But I love this. I don't know how many people follow Marty up north on Twitter, but I love this. If you want to experience a 15-minute city, one where everything is 1.5 kilometers from everything, just move to any small town in Alberta, Saskatchewan, or even Ontario. Sell your car and walk everywhere. You won't last 2 weeks, and you'll be back. You'll be crying to go back to the big city.
Yeah. Just like mere Alberta.
That's it. Yeah. So now you may wonder, well, why are cities such a big deal? Well, here's Mayor Don Iveson tells the UN conference that cities can fight climate change alone. That means that all you people who live in cities, you are now climate change warriors, whether you want to be or not.
Yeah.
And he said that they have an influence over half of Canada's total greenhouse gas emissions. And here he is riding his bike to work in the middle of winter when he was still in office. And here's his successor, Amarjeet Sohi and Catherine McKenna flying to COP27. They look like they're having a good time.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the 15-minute city really goes also hand in hand with the smart city, where these fourth industrial revolution concepts are intertwined, where we have the Internet of Things, a digital surveillance society, robo-cops, robo-dogs, automatic waste disposal, pay per waste disposal, self-driving car shares, and big data for better efficiencies. All of this was sort of bound up in the smart city idea for Sidewalk Labs. And right now, the pitch for 15-minute cities is that before the recent lockdowns, we led hectic lives, as if everybody got a vacation during lockdowns. It's really unbelievable what they try and sell people. And now they're saying, what if we could create a new normal? Well, a lot of people like the old normal. But here's part of the plan of cities, and you'll see how this relates to lockdowns where they blocked off streets. So the current model is this grid of crisscrossing streets. And what they basically do is they want to gut a lot of that road activity, and those roads turn them into walking spaces, green spaces, pedestrian malls, maybe some kind of a craft fair, that kind of thing. And make it all, walkable or active transport, as they like to call it. And the core principles is that every neighborhood would have easy access to goods and services, groceries, fresh food, and healthcare. Well, that's a surprise because we don't have enough healthcare
already. Right now.
So how are you going to do that in every neighborhood? And they have rather utopian ideas about different housing types, affordability, all kinds of households, and enable people to live closer to where they work. Well, some people live in the north end of Calgary and work in the south end. That's just how it worked out. So what are they planning, that the work should move there? Are they planning that you should have mandatory telework? Or are you planning that you have to move closer to your work and live in a pod? I mean, that was one of the rejected factors in the Sidewalk Labs proposal, is that the people assessing their plan said at one point that the size of the apartments that they were going to offer were basically uninhabitable. They were too small.
Too small. Yeah, wow. Yeah.
And just imagine living in a micro condo during a lockdown.
Yeah. And lots of people did.
Yes. And suffered.
500 square feet. Oh, I would have gone bonkers.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and here lockdowns proved out this 4IR remote work concept, so more people can work close to home. And also they kind of assume here that everybody will get along, like it's Woodstock or something. Like lots of people, if you have a gentrified neighborhood, which these walkable neighborhoods basically are, they do not like low income people living there. And I have personal experience with that. I've seen thousands of FOIP reports, FOIP emails showing that this is what happens. So you can't put that one past me. Sorry. And also every neighborhood should be able to breathe clean, fresh air. Well, let's see about that. So population density is a key factor for a workable 15-minute city. And here we're going to compare Barcelona, because this concept basically originated in Europe. Barcelona is a city that's 2,000 years old. It has more than 5 million people in the metropolitan area and 16,000 people per square kilometer. So look at Barcelona overlaid on Calgary.
Oh, yeah.
Which has 1,500 people per square kilometer. And just to give you a sense of the number of people here, not the density, but the number, Wetaskiwin has 12,000 population, Camrose 18,000, Brooks 14,000. So without appropriate density, you can't have businesses operating there. They won't have the traffic. And here, we can look at where Barcelona is. It's a port city. It's on the Mediterranean, nice and warm there. And here's where we are. And this book is about a cold welcome. This is about the people who first came, the Europeans who came from Europe to North America, and what a horrible experience it was for them. And why? Because people thought it was the new Andalusia. They thought it was going to be just like Spain because it's on similar latitudes. But Europe is warmed by the Gulf Stream. It has much more temperate winters than we have. And of course, this latitude is crucial. Below this latitude, this is where all the snowbirds go in winter.
That's right.
Here's where we live the rest of the year and in winter.
Climate is a big thing.
That's a big factor. And as for clean air, I took this screenshot the other night. You can see that North America looks pretty good, and Europe does look rather polluted. And why is that? Because they decided to incentivize diesel cars over regular cars because they had fewer CO2 emissions, but they have much more NOx and SOx, which in that European environment, like nitrogen oxides and PM 2.5 soot, because diesel cars are much more sooty than regular ICE vehicles or regular gas vehicles. So here's the air quality at the same time in Alberta. You can see that we don't have any problem there. Occasionally we'll get an inversion, but regularly the air quality in Alberta is very, very good. So again, these are all the things that they want to put together in a 20-minute neighborhood or 15-minute city. But, if you're going to have local employment and local shopping centers and local health facilities and services, you need big population density. And again, recently, here's this fellow, Schellenhuber, who's a fairly well-known climate scientist in Europe. And he is claiming again, everyone gets 3 tons of CO2 per year, but if you need more, you just have to buy it.
Just buy it. That's
So just imagine now, people are already struggling with the carbon tax, and yet suddenly they need to buy more CO2 credits, right? Just imagine what happens when CO2 goes up to $170 a ton. Who's going to be able to do that? So he and his group are really into these planetary boundaries, and they're very catastrophic in their thinking. So again, we return to this deadline 2020, that cities need to reduce emissions of individuals. And there's only one way they can do that, and that's limiting your freedom of movement and your freedom of choice.
Yeah.
But what else is going on? Well, in 2012, the IMF wrote a report where they basically said that good health care makes people live too long. And they said that unexpected longevity creates pension fund liabilities. And they also said that the elderly will consume a growing share of resources. And we did see that when I referred to the boomers.
Yeah.
Where's my cursor? Yeah. And Citibank in 2016 issued a report saying that OECD countries are facing 78 trillion in pension liabilities, meaning that's the gap where they don't have the money to pay for the pensions promised.
Wow.
Now, the World Economic Forum and the UN signed a strategic partnership framework in 2019, June, which is about financing the 2030 agenda, climate change, health, digital cooperation, gender equality, empowerment of women, education, and skills. So we keep hearing a lot of that stuff in the press. And they also signed a strategic partnership with the OECD in January of 2020. And so that included artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain and distributed ledger technology, the Internet of Things, robotics, and smart cities.
Yeah.
So the World Economic Forum, for those who may not be aware, is started as a think tank led by Klaus Schwab. It's basically in Switzerland. They also have a partner office in China, and they bring together all the movers and shakers of the world. And basically today they rather consider themselves masters of the world, that somehow they've been divinely sent to change the world in their image, and the rest of us plebes can just shut up, they said. So no one talks about the debt, right, that we have in this country. So pre-COVID, there was a $250,000 bill per citizen, courtesy of Canada's governments. And here the Fraser Institute is talking about the shortfall of more than almost 800 billion for CPP, almost 500 billion for OAS, and almost 900 billion for Medicare. That was before
COVID.
Yeah. But the post-COVID debt, and we have this on our blog. Robert Lyman did a summary of this report, which is the fiscal reference tables straight from the government. So you can see that expenditures rose by 93% in 2 years, which was the largest increase in history. And the budgetary deficit rose from 5.6 billion to 312.4 billion, which is an increase of 5,479%. And the total interest-bearing debt of the federal government rose from 1.02 trillion to 1.44 trillion. A 1% increase in interest rates would add 14.4 billion to the annual federal debt servicing charges. So, we have huge debt to deal with.
Yeah. I like this analogy with the trillion, and it's very true. If anybody hasn't seen this exact little diagram, obviously you're going to explain it, but essentially you start off with $1 million in $10,000 bag, and $1 million looks like a lot of money, but I mean, you could probably go through it fairly quickly if you're not careful. And so you can see exactly how big the pile is based on the size of $1 trillion. Like, that is warehouses of money.
Right. And this is $1 million in $100 bills in packets of 10,000.
Yeah.
And so then that's just extrapolated here, and you see how puny the person becomes faced by this incredible debt. Yeah. So we have kind of a couple of those, one and a half of those at least.
Yeah.
And if people are into numbers, just to give you an idea, like a trillion, this goes through what 1,000 seconds is 17 minutes, etc.
Yeah.
1 million seconds, 11 days.
Yeah.
1 billion is 31.5 years. and a trillion is 31,709 years.
Yeah. One of the things I usually say is the difference between a billion and a million is about a billion.
Yeah.
Very true. Because then
Very true.
999 million, a billion, yeah. A million. Yeah. Anyways.
So what about healthcare costs? Well, life expectancy is high in Alberta and in most of the OECD nations, but it creates a problem of its own kind. So life expectancy at birth in Alberta, it works out to around 78 years old, 80 years old. And although this is from 2005 from AHS, this kind of bump hasn't changed that much. So you can see as people age, as they get into their 60s, they start to have these chronic conditions that need more care, much more care. Yeah. And healthcare is the province's largest expense. So I can't remember. Okay, this is from 2019. So we were spending in Alberta $20.6 billion a year for healthcare. Yeah. So 20 of these. Yeah. Which is a huge, and that's 43% of the province's total operating costs. Now, of course, we've had this offer of $46.1 billion for 10 provinces and territories, new money over the next decade. So, of course, if you put that in context with our current needs, it's a drop in the bucket. And if you read this book by Susan Martinuk, it's very enlightening. It shows that universal health care was never viable from the beginning. So basically, everyone's health care has been rationed for probably the past 30 years. But the 15-minute city promises health care just a walk away. And for this, you need lots of data because you're going to have these little pods, perhaps. This is one solution, where the patient goes in and sits down by themselves. The doctor will teleport in and will guide them to use various examining tools. And it's called a consult station. Now, this is a unit being used in France. I can't say for sure this is what we would use here. But effectively what happens if you have the person's data, medical records, then you can run it through artificial intelligence, that in conjunction with the technical assessment and the medical doctor, which may or may not be a real doctor. It could also be a deep fake doctor. But anyway, you would get some kind of assessment and subsequently a prescription and some kind of care. So.
And even for that, I used to actually work for a military contractor back in the late 90s, early 2000s. We were actually working on a project for telemedicine, which is exactly what that was. Now, obviously, we were still looking. We weren't LCD TVs and stuff hadn't even come out yet, so they were still the big bubble CRTs, and everything was built on old technology. Like if anybody remembers the pre-Pentium computer years, 386s, that sort of thing, like they were giant things. And of course now with the technology that it is, and you could probe yourself if you had to, I guess, that part does make sense. And a lot of these concepts do make sense, right? It's just that like they're great ideas until they're not so good ideas.
Right, because who programs that AI?
That's right.
What happens if people say, you know what, everyone who's over the age of 65, we're going to give them a special diagnosis.
That's right.
And there's no one accountable in that case. It's not like when a doctor makes a mistake and God forbid you go into surgery and they cut off your right leg and not your left. Then there is some recourse, but when it's a machine, there's no recourse. And so again, I agree with you. I'm not discounting that these could be good ideas, but we are not being consulted as individuals.
No, we are not.
And if our health data is being handed over, what else is happening with it?
That's right.
Because obviously we are facing a financial crisis. We're facing a boomer healthcare crisis, and we don't have the facilities, and no one's talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
You see, I mean, people are talking like, healthcare is in trouble, the system's collapsing. Right. Okay. But nobody's talking about these kind of larger issues.
Yeah. And I think that's, what these webinars with APP are doing is it's not just one thing that's going wrong. It's like, it's this mesh of stuff. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And especially the way you're presenting this one for sure. I mean, it's not just one problem. You will see how they all kind of fit together in the end.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, the legacy of lockdowns is that lockdowns killed many people.
Yes, they did.
This is the Deloitte report.
Yeah.
So I'm not making up any of this.
Yeah.
And many more people, because of the delayed treatment, will either die prematurely or they will choose MAID over their pain.
Yeah.
So, I mean, will the government pat itself on the back and say, at least we gave them a way out?
Yeah.
I mean, that's, people have been paying into healthcare for decades, anticipating that when the time came, that there would be help for them.
Yeah.
And that they would be deserving of that care because it was universal.
Yeah.
And now that's shown to be impossible for most people. So again, the fourth industrial revolution relies heavily on digitization of society, and digital ID ties in with your healthcare, your financial services, food and sustainability, travel and mobility. So that would be like the Vaxport that was tested during lockdowns.
Yeah.
Humanitarian response. This might be the only place where it would make sense if you were, a nation of poor people, and like in Turkey where the huge earthquake struck, where you actually could help people because they had a digital ID. You could help restore their real life.
Yeah.
But that won't exist for those people for the most part. E-commerce, social platforms, e-government, telecommunications, to own and use devices, and telecommunications to monitor devices. So, all this would be tied together. And there are lots of cities in Canada that have been participating in this contest that the government was running to award 5 million, 10 million, or 50 million prizes to smart city applicants.
Yeah. Well, we've seen people in a situation where they're offered something for free, or offered maybe $100, or maybe you could possibly win a lottery, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and also, I mean, why did most people get the vaccine? Because they wanted to fly.
Yeah.
But what is this? Well, it's the Known Traveler Digital ID.
Yeah.
It's the pilot project with the World Economic Forum, Canada, the government of the Netherlands, and these airports. Yeah. So, of course, if you make flying miserable and impossible, if you have total chaos in the airport, and then you promise people something like this that will make things go fast and smooth.
Oh, I'll sign up for that. Sure. It sounds so easy.
Right. And then all of a sudden, again, all your data is there.
Yeah.
And who has access to it? Well, now, what's the privacy order here?
Yeah. Yeah.
Who, you mean all these people, all these groups have access to it? Yeah. Like, we don't know. Is that clear?
Yeah.
And of course, because things are being digitized, well, many corporations see a great opportunity there. Again, the World Economic Forum in 2018 on the threshold of a digital identity revolution. And voila, here's Interac, ready to hop in with digital ID for healthcare. So, and again, what was that? The advent of the COVID pandemic, a new moment of change has been thrust upon us, right? So, again, this is, they don't want you to use cash. They want you to tap, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so what does that lead to? It also leads to central bank currency, digital currency for Canada. And this is from the Bankers Association of Canada.
Yeah.
And they're saying that the rationale is that the day may come when Canadians can no longer readily use cash for everyday transactions. So, I think that's silly because, if I have cash, if I have $20 bill.
This note is legal tender.
That's right. This
Until
note
it's
is
not.
legal tender. And
Yeah.
if all the power goes out, if we have a big blackout, a big snowstorm or something,
Yeah.
this is still legal tender,
Yeah.
and I can do business with it.
Yeah.
And in fact, the fellow who wrote this book, which I'll refer to later, Cloud Money, he writes about how before hurricanes down in the southern states, for instance, people would go to the ATM and take out a lot of cash
because they knew
that for the next week or two, all the Interact services will be down, their cards won't work, and they will still have to buy food and gas and keep their families going. So cash is the ultimate resilient thing. So why would we not be able to use cash for everyday transactions? And then of course they say, oh, well, you could use a mobile phone or a special card or device. And there's a rather sickening video online with this fellow, August Karstens, who's with the Bank of International Settlements, where he's talking about how they don't like the idea of people using cash because they don't know what you're doing with it. Now, he wants to know what burger I'm buying. Right? Because he wants a bite.
I want a receipt for that donut I bought. Yeah.
That's it. I mean, obviously there are some concerns about, say, international terrorism and all that, but there are many different orders of security in place already. I mean, we've got FinTrack and all these other groups who do nothing but track these transactions.
Yeah.
So my $10 isn't such a big deal when I buy a burger. So of course, the problem is that many young people will love this idea of the digital currency and everything's on your card and your digital ID. So they will see the convenience.
It's total convenience.
Yeah, but having watched what happened to the Freedom Convoy, and those of you who may have been directly affected by it, frozen funds. Access to your money can be turned off, every transaction documented, social credit scores, vulnerability to state and foreign actors. Banks have control over every penny you own. I mean, theoretically, they do now. It's in your account. But, it's all a paper trail, and you deal there with a person. And if the central bank is some other place, and suddenly your account is shut off, let's say even a case of mistaken identity, what do you do?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
No recourse. So you have zero privacy. You might have a cyber attack. You have no anonymity. And all your movements and actions are traceable. And, people sometimes say, well, I don't do anything wrong, so I'm not worried about it. Well, if you have a government that suddenly doesn't like some worldview that you have, then you are doing wrong, no matter what you think you're doing in their eyes, and that makes you vulnerable. So anyway, this is a great book, Cloud Money. It has a different cover from the one I showed here, but he says, don't do it. Don't go for the digital currency. Forget it. And this is just from the internet, but I thought it was quite succinct.
Very true.
Cashless society means zero cash. So you can't have like a car,
birthday
garage sale, or, giving kids money for their tooth fairy piggy bank, tipping people. You can't just sell things for cash off Kijiji or whatever. So, everything will be tracked and traced.
And likewise, I don't know if you have, maybe this is the part, the $50, how $50 goes. I've read that too, but go ahead and explain.
I thought I also, just another little thing from the internet, but I thought it made quite a bit of sense. If you have a $50 banknote, you go to a restaurant, you pay for dinner, that $50 remains $50, no matter whose hands.
Goes to the dry cleaner, goes to, the movie theater, comes back.
Right. But if it's a card, and it's digital, then there's always a bank fee or a transaction fee. And so actually your $50 is becoming less and less and less.
That's right.
As it goes through the system. So again, coming back to the 15-minute cities, for inclusive and sustainable cities, My Carbon. Yes, your personal carbon ration. And you see, because of all the hysteria generated by Greta's unfounded statements that the World Economic Forum proliferated around the world through their trustees and partners, young adults tend to be more concerned than older counterparts that climate change will harm them, right? So young people are quite keen to count their own carbon footprint. And in fact, the Royal Bank now has a thing called Join Good Side. And it's a carbon footprint counter. And MasterCard has a thing called Do Economy. And they even have Do Black, which won't let you buy anything once you're over your carbon footprint ration.
Wow.
Yeah, so these things, you know, are very attractive to young people because it's kind of like a video game, right? But the problem is there's now a convergence of the climate, carbon, and biomedical state tyranny. And here are 3 interconnected examples. First of all, they are now thinking about personal carbon rations again because of the Vaxport. The Vaxport created the platform to actually have personal carbon rations. And in terms of healthcare, there's a call for net zero healthcare. And they think that they can cut healthcare emissions in half by 2030. Healthcare emissions are about 5%. I don't know about you, but I don't think a heart surgery will help anyone.
That's right.
So what does that mean? It means that now in the UK, for instance, they're looking at geriatric medicine in the era of climate change. Now, when has climate ever not changed? This is not an era of climate change. This is just a regular era. But it helps people to think about doing bad things when it says we estimate the carbon footprint of frailty, that being elderly people, to be 1.7 megatons CO2e, or 7% of the total NHS carbon footprint. So basically they're saying you old people are using up too much energy. And you know what happens then? Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities.
That's true.
And so during lockdown, in the UK, care homes used powerful sedatives to speed up COVID deaths. And the number of prescriptions for midazolam doubled. And they have a delivering net zero national healthcare plan. And actually, many of our doctors and nurses are also on this same diatribe. You can see that Dr. Vipond and Dr. Courtney Howard and Dr. Lem, they're all really into it. And it's a slippery slope, people. So reject the new abnormal. This is the advice of Aaron Kheriaty. He says that the corona pandemic conferred enormous power on certain government officials, and they have no intention of giving it up. So it's a really good book to read. I encourage people to read it. Or if you don't like books, he's got a number of shorter articles online, many of them published with the Brownstone Institute. And ironically, of course, now that they're going to robotics and AI and flying cars and drones, the energy they deny you while claiming to save the planet is what they need to track your every move and purchase and your personal carbon footprint, and to use AI to predict your behavior, run your smart city, power your robot dogs, delivery drones, and your robot or deepfake doctors.
That's right.
So that's the grand irony.
So we're really just shifting our energy use to that.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, and to all those big tech corporations, and they all love it. Like I've watched a few webinars with people from IBM, you know, pushing electric vehicles or pushing wind and solar, and they're really into it. And you think, what's IBM doing there? Well, supercomputers, right? Massive supercomputers, petabyte computers, you know, that can manage the grid functions, right? Software. I mean, it's a huge, huge market for them. And with all the boomers fading away, they need new markets, right? So, and government whether it be municipal, provincial, or federal, government always has the money because they always have their hand in your pocket.
I was just going to say, it's all our money anyway.
Yeah. But again, we're not being consulted on these things, right? It's all under the umbrella of the climate change emergency. But let's look at that. Is there really an emergency? Well, the Parliamentary Budget Officer just came out with this report. So 15-minute cities and smart cities are not about saving the planet. They're about controlling you. And I say that because usually they say we have to do these things, like big climate change plans, like the city of Calgary wants to spend $87 billion on climate change. The city of Edmonton is spending $100 million on bike lanes. And they say we have to do these things now because in the future, the economic damages will be huge, enormous, catastrophic. It will destroy us. But in fact, the Parliamentary Budget Officer did this report, and he did two different kinds of assessments. One was that if all countries met their Paris targets, our economy would be damaged by perhaps 6.6%. And projecting 80 years into the future, he's looking at a $10 trillion GDP. So that would be about $140 billion worth of damage. So Calgary's already spending 62% of that.
That's right,
and if nobody did anything, it would be 5.8% damage.
So we're better off not doing anything, is what you're
Exactly. We might as well not do anything.
Exactly.
No. And so, and yet we're spending billions. In the Just Transition document. It states that the government already spent $100 billion on climate change. So our president has written a couple of short articles about this, which is on his blog, so you can have a look at those. And the Parliamentary Budget Officer also said, while the impact on Canadian GDP is from global GHG emissions, Canada's own emissions are not large enough to materially impact climate change.
Yeah, we've heard that.
Yeah. So if Canada's emissions do not materially impact climate change, Calgary's and Edmonton's emissions certainly do not.
Yeah.
And we should also be aware that we never voted for the green crony capitalists of the Club of Rome to run our lives or set our energy policies. So they have this planetary emergency plan, and their plan is simply just to throw money at things and build more wind and solar. And you should be aware that wind and solar, they're not really great at producing energy. What they are good at doing is creating subsidies for the investors and also creating renewable energy credits, which are tradable credits. So, you see that how they are part of the whole carbon trading plan and the ultimate plan that you as an individual will also have to buy and trade carbon credits, probably just to survive. But the alleged climate emergency arose from the misuse of the implausible scenario RCP 8.5. So this is about where we are with our CO2 emissions. This is from 2017, but it's on a par. We're pretty close here. And what's happened is that many researchers and scientists have used this implausible RCP 8.5 scenario, claiming it's the business as usual scenario, when it would imply that we would produce, I think, produce and use 4 times the oil that the world presently uses, and something like 7 times the coal that the world presently uses, and that there would be 3 billion more people. Now, the other kind of scary thing is that all these other lower scenarios have 3 billion fewer people.
I was going to say that. Population down.
Yeah. So what bad conclusion could somebody draw from that? But it's no longer being used in the most recent IPCC report as Roger Pielke Jr. reports, or it's not seen as a likely future. So it's basically been scrapped, and most mainstream climate scientists reject it as implausible.
Yeah.
So that means that we're actually on a target. If we use this as a guideline, we're doing okay. There's no climate emergency. But how did it get proliferated? Well, it's because these guys met with a bunch of ENGOs. These are two green billionaires. They met with a bunch of ENGOs. They wrote a report called Risky Business, which proliferated through the financial communities. And so the financial and banking communities are stuck on this, which is not reality, but they think it's business as usual. Mm-hmm. And it was these guys who promoted it along with their ENGOs. So that's how it proliferated. And Roger Pielke Jr., he's quite funny on Twitter. He runs sort of a weekly thing like, here's another 10 papers that are using RCP 8.5 as their baseline and calling it business as usual.
Yeah.
So anyhow, is climate emergency a financial lever? Well, is your city playing the carbon markets? City forest credits. How about that? Buying and selling forest credits in your city. So, when you're dealing in carbon credits, you're really, this is the best quote ever from Harper's. The carbon market is based on the lack of delivery of an invisible substance to no one.
Yeah.
That's what people are paying money for.
Mm-hmm.
And behind the scenes, of course, maybe you don't know, and I must admit I'm not a bond market expert, but there's huge money in climate bonds. And these are some of the participants in it. So, like all the big banks are in there, insurance companies, they're all investing in these climate bonds. And I assume that many municipal pension funds are in there too.
Would be. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's an organization called the UNPRI, Principles for Responsible Investment, which sounds like a good thing, but they are actually climate addled. They're addicted to climate change. They're pushing ESG on all investors.
Yeah.
This is an organization of about somewhere between 800 to 1,000 institutional investors. Mm-hmm. And that would be pension funds and insurance company funds. And they sit on about $100 trillion in assets under management. And these are the guys who are skewing markets worldwide.
Yeah.
And why? Well, their fiduciary guru is Al Gore. And he's not our friend.
Right.
And here are the 6 principles that they're pushing, which is they incorporate ESG into every decision. They seek appropriate disclosure. They work together to become effective in implementing ESG. They're active owners. They incorporate ESG into our ownership policies. Yeah. They promote acceptance and implementation of them. And they each report. And then actually with Principle 6, they have another thing which is called comply or explain.
Yeah.
So even though it's a voluntary organization, once you sign on, there's social pressure within the group.
Yeah.
And I don't know, but I'm guessing they may have access to maybe better interest rates through some of their investments or through banking.
That seems what they say. I was going to ask, do you want to just do a quick little synopsis of what ESG is and how the reporting is done?
Sure. Yeah. That's environment, social, and governance.
Yeah.
So, on the surface, it sounds like a good idea. Like, yes, we should have responsible investment, but it's really become, part of like cancel culture and the wokeism. Yeah. And in fact, Steve Sukup wrote a great book about it called The Dictatorship of Woke Capital. And it's all about political correctness capturing business. And of course, Al Gore is at the forefront of ESG.
Yeah, yeah.
But see, what ESG has kind of done is that it's flipped the traditional idea of investing upside down. Mm-hmm. Usually you used to invest because it was a good idea. Maybe if you invested in a coal plant, you probably didn't make a lot of money right away,
Mhm.
but over 40, 50 years, you would have solid incremental gain, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And it would be a winner.
Yeah.
Now, if you put up a wind farm, you can put it up in probably 2 years.
Yeah.
You have flow through shares. They usually split the companies into 2 or 3 parts,
Mhm.
so the monies are all protected. Some of the investors have what they call ring fenced investments offshore.
Mhm.
They typically don't pay taxes. They don't end up paying taxes.
Yeah.
So there's actually nothing coming into the GDP.
Yeah.
So lots of these things are being built. There is some economic activity around it.
Yeah.
But they're deemed to be a better investment because they're labeled with this ESG, because they're supposedly clean tech, supposedly socially acceptable, and then they throw some diversity on the board and call it good governance.
Yeah.
And away we go.
Yeah. And really, even with that, the government requires all these companies to create ESG reports and send them in so that everybody's a good doobie. But if they don't submit them in, the government comes down on them, and they probably have no access to capital funds going forward, so that they basically are choking the company to death.
That's right.
And so that's the big thing that's happening. And I wish there was a way, and maybe there would be through an independent Alberta, that we could basically say, you know what, we're just gonna get rid of these ESG reports, because really they're not doing anything other than making this giant Ponzi scheme where money is only going to be available to people who are good and doing their proper reporting.
Right? That's right. And when you look at the states, I think there's 17 attorneys general who are now going after BlackRock.
Yeah.
Because BlackRock, was pushing the whole ESG thing and pushing divestment. Yeah. And they said, wait a minute, we as attorneys general, our states have investments in fossil fuels. You're taking our pension funds and working against our industries, the necessary industries that keep people alive every day, that make modern medicine possible. Yeah. Like, we're going to pull our pension funds out of BlackRock. Yeah. So, they are fighting back. And Steve Sukup, and there's another guy in the States called Vivek Ramaswamy. And he wrote a book called Woke Inc., which is along similar veins. Yeah. Anyway, so there is a way to fight back. But again, this is all tied to the climate theme, right? The whole because if you went to a bank and said, I'm going to build a wind farm, they said, great, where's your financing coming from? You say, well, I'm going to get subsidies from the government. Yeah. And then I'm going to sell these carbon credits that are not worth anything to other people. I'm going to sell the lack of delivery of an invisible substance to no one. Mm-hmm. The bank would go, wow, get out, know?
Yeah.
So they created a whole new accounting system, and that is ESG, because, it's not a real market.
Yeah.
Anyhow, and here we have Larry Fink of BlackRock saying markets don't like uncertainty. Markets like totalitarian governments, which is not true. But obviously ESG equals totalitarianism and a social credit society. And Canadians should note that, for instance, the McConnell Foundation, which is a tax-subsidized charity, put $10 million into BlackRock. Mm-hmm. I have big questions about that, because basically that was partly my tax money.
Yeah.
Charities are supposed to be investing locally and helping people, building hospitals, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, but, just to bring it home again, the UNPRI signatory, one of them is the Alberta Investment Management Corporation, right here in Alberta, and they represent all these pension plan funds.
Alberta Teachers, yeah.
Alberta Teachers, the local authorities pension plan, management employees, blah, 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 provincial judges and masters, the public service pension plan, special forces, and university academic pension plan. So you can see why there would be a lot of support from government bureaucracies when this is the case in Alberta, but it's the case across Canada.
Mm-hmm.
When public service pension funds are tied up with the UNPRI, and Al Gore is the fiduciary guru directing people to invest in ESG. And it should be noted that under the Notley government, Alberta reported on the climate plan to the UNPRI. I don't know what they reported, but that might be an interesting FOIP report. Anyway, so I would like to suggest, if you are interested in that kind of material, that people read our reports. This is from 2016 when we were just starting to learn about it. Undue influence, markets skewed.
Yeah.
And then these two are responding to a report by Koski Minsky, which is a law firm. They wrote a report in the fall of 2015, basically telling pension funds that climate denial is no longer an option. When in fact, a pension fund trustee is supposed to invest money as if it were their own for, for their beneficiaries with the same care that they would as if it were their own. So they're telling people you can no longer question climate change. You have to make investments based on this crazy kind of ESG thinking. And practically speaking, no matter how many times people ride their bike around the city, cities will never reach net zero. And there's also no need, because CO2 is not the control knob. Here are some other things that are recommended reading. One is Peter Drucker's book, where this is called The Unseen Revolution, how pension fund socialism came to America. He wrote it back in the 70s, and he foresaw that over time, pension funds would buy most of the shares in corporate America. And that's what happened. And that's why we see the UNPRI has so much power, because all of their pension funds are now activist investors. In fact, in one of our reports that I just showed you, let me just see. Oops, sorry. In one of these reports, we talk about how in 2014 they had the Montreal Pledge, where these investors pledged to be activists and to get laggard corporations and governments in Canada on board with the whole climate change hysteria thing. So that's a huge force. I mean, they NEI Investments, for instance, went to all the banks. They went to Bell Media. They went to Rogers Media. They also, NEI Investments also sent a letter, submission number 107, to Rachel Notley when she was elected, saying we represent $4.6 trillion in investments under management. And here's what we think you should do. This should be your climate plan. Boom, boom, boom. So, and they had about 120 signatories. And interestingly enough, some of them were also people who had funded the tar sands campaign. So this is another book that no one talks about. I think it's fantastic. Adam Harms is with one of the universities down east, either Guelph or Western, I can't quite remember. Anyway, he talks about how mutual funds threaten the political and economic wealth of nations. They have that much power. So we as voters are really being left out in the cold. And Joel Kotkin, he's an American. He's written about the coming of neo-feudalism. He uses California as his main example, but he talks about many of the things that I've talked about today, and how this encroachment on the middle class is just, it's gutting the middle class and turning us all into serfs, carbon serfs. And of course, the book I mentioned at the beginning, The End of the World is Just the Beginning, by Peter Zahan. Very, very interesting on the demographics of the world and the split, because his thesis is also that the US used to be sort of the world's policeman on the high seas. And basically the US after World War II said to all the countries of the world, hey, let's do business. Let's not make war. We'll make trade instead. And we, as the U.S., will be your on-the-sea policemen. So people will be able to ship things without too many troubles. But that recently, in his view, that is collapsing, and that won't be the case anymore. So big changes are coming. You know, the World Economic Forum keeps saying that, and that's true. And I've shown you some of them tonight.
Yeah.
But we're not really talking about them in the press.
Yeah.
And from our perspective, the real risk of climate change is cooling. Warming isn't such a big deal. Where do people go for vacation?
They all go south anyways. Yeah.
They go someplace warm, right?
Yeah.
So the real risk of climate change is cooling.
Yeah.
And
you're right, because with more CO2, you have more plants, and which again gets things warmer, more oxygen in the air, and we're better off actually that. And you're right, but if it goes the other way, then it's a bit more of a concern.
Right, and so we're facing a confluence of problems. There are a number of astrophysicists. This one happens to be a Russian astrophysicist, but he wrote this back in 2016, I think it was. So, please don't call me a spy. Anyway, but he foresaw the new little ice age had begun. Yeah. And this graph gives you a sense of that. So we are going to have a reduction of fossil fuel output because there's an energy gap right now and an energy crisis.
Yeah.
We're having a collapse of globalization, so there'll be fewer things that we can access, and now facing the risk of a new little ice age and cooling. And cooling's not good for food production.
Mm-hmm.
So the combination of cooling and fertilizer shortages, some of which are imposed and some of them are due to market conditions, will create food shortages.
Wow.
And there's also nothing rational or just about the proposed transition. You can see this is from the IEA. This shows the total energy consumption by source in Canada. And there's a very thin little yellow line above biomass and waste, and that's wind and solar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's
so
a lot of energy production there.
Yeah, and that's not going to flip over in the space of 10 or 30 years. It's just not. And you can also see that global fossil fuel consumption has grown in the era of climate diplomacy.
Mm-hmm.
And we could never go down to net zero in a short period of time. This does the math on what kind of replacement facilities we'd need to be built on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And of course, there's also nothing possible about the net zero transition. And mostly the materials either don't exist, the mines don't exist. They take about 16 years to get a mine up and running.
Mm-hmm.
And so this fellow named Simon Michelle did a very detailed assessment. This is about 1,000 pages long. Robert Lyman fortunately put it into about 10 pages. But, you can look at this, and he just simply extrapolated the global metal production from 2019 to the years to produce the metal required for the transition. And for lithium, it would be 9,920 years.
Wow. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. So, and he said himself, I've been in dozens of meetings where people have made all kinds of, boardroom presentations about the net zero and how swell it's going to be. And he said, and no one's ever asked the question, like, is there a material supply chain for this?
Yeah.
How deep is it? How long will it take? How much money will it take?
Yeah.
And mining all of this takes fossil fuels. Right?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
A lot. In fact, there's a guy on Twitter. I don't know if people follow him, but John Lee Pettimore. He's a mining engineer. He's worked mining mechanic. He's worked all over the world. Great educational material on his Twitter feed. You see these massive machines, mining machines.
Yeah.
And then he outlines the amount of fuel they use every hour.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we've seen lots of memes out there that basically say that. I mean, it's like look at the pipeline, and you don't see a pipeline; it's just a green field. And then look at how they're actually mining for lithium for the batteries, and it's just this giant, whatever it is, a giant hole
in the ground.
Really,
yeah.
It's just disgusting to look at. And and depending on where it is, it's child labor because you don't have to pay as much, and it's just socially it's wrong.
Yeah, and yet those are the companies that get the ESG scores.
Yes, you're right.
That's the whole thing. The whole ESG was supposed to prevent that.
Yeah,
but now it's like, nah.
Well, because they've bought something to offset a lot of those credits, right?
Right,
so
right. You can buy carbon credits, and then you're clean.
Yeah, yeah. You're net zero, which is the whole philosophy.
There you go. Yeah. So ultimately, climate change is cyclical. Now, Greta's book just came out, and her book on the cover features probably this much here. Oops, sorry about that. This much. Oh, this much of the past, right?
Yeah.
So, if you block that off, and you just look at that, you go, wow, it went from cooling to warming. How horrible is that?
That's right, yeah.
But if you look at the last 2,000 years, this was done by Dr. Roy Spencer, then you see we had a very significant cooling period.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had a really warm period, warmer than what it is now and quite long. Yeah. And then cool, and then warm, and then cool, warm, cool, warm. Yeah. So, you see that there's a cyclical pattern here, and it's not you. It's not CO2.
Yeah.
So again, just going back to the 15-minute city, it's a concept that was developed by Europeans. It may have some benefit for high-density cities in temperate areas. 15-minute cities claim to provide convenience and inclusion, but they take away your freedom of movement by car, and they will actually decimate downtown office infrastructure. Mm-hmm. It's important to remember that COVID crashed our personal neural maps, our small and medium-sized businesses, and our office work culture. So, it really, like neural maps are how your brain sets your daily functions, So if you got up in the middle of the night, you probably could navigate around your house in the dark if the power was out, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a neural map in your mind. Yeah. And every day, let's say you go to the office every day, you have an idea in your mind. Okay, I'm going to get up at this time. I'm going to do these things. I'm going to go there. I'm going to go there. And at the office, I will see these people. So you have this map, and COVID, really crashed all that.
Yeah.
It really disoriented people. It's almost like being lost in the woods. And so the risk of this 15-minute city, it sounds very comforting, right?
Yeah.
And but I believe that there was an intention to do this, to facilitate the fourth industrial revolution, where big tech will run your smart city, your neighborhood, your digital currency instead of cash. Mm-hmm. There will be no cars, or it will only be on-demand transit or drone delivery, just like in the World Economic Forum video, you'll own nothing.
Yeah. And
personal carbon ration will be imposed, and a social credit society.
Yeah.
So, this was a very enlightening book for me to read as well. And the advice from this fellow is be here now.
Something's not right. Recognize it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think most of the viewers, for sure. I mean, the reason you guys are online is because something isn't right and you're looking for answers. And and if you follow APP, of course, then you're actually you're hoping that there is an answer. And it's not just, well, I mean, you could say it's just one answer, but there's a lot of problems. And can they be overcome by one big answer? Well, yes. If we end up becoming more independent and basically saying to big government and bureaucracy that we don't want to be involved in this, we, get us out of this path to basically just you'll be happy and know nothing, right? Like, we don't want to be in that situation.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so on the climate note, just to end off, just remember the sun is the main driver of climate change, not you, not CO2. Yeah. CO2 is not a control knob that can fine-tune climate, and politicians can't stop climate change.
Yeah.
So thank you for watching and letting me present all this.
Keep that
If you
slide up
want
there.
to join us or donate,
Yeah.
here's the information.
Yeah.
And I thank you very much.
Yeah, friendsofscience.org. And obviously, I mean, you do an awful lot of research just really on your own time, right? And to be able to present to this and in such a well thought out presentation, I mean, you should be rewarded. So if people do appreciate what you've done, please, there are email transfers. You can go to contact@friendsofscience.org, and please let Michelle know that you appreciate the work that she's done. And
thank you.
Yeah, no, that was great. I mean, there is a lot of questions. There's a lot of things. I wrote down a whole page full of notes in small writing. But you know what, I think we'll go back, because we're an hour and 40 minutes in kind of thing. Let's go back and look at some of the questions that people did ask. I think that's fair, because if you've been on here for that amount of time and you did ask questions right at the beginning, I think we should at least acknowledge that. And let's see, some of these questions may have already been answered. Doesn't flying cars already have emissions? Well, you know what? There's a lot of stuff that when they're going to come up with these ideas that will have emissions. And we talked with Alex Epstein on this topic of fossil future, and it does take more energy. And really, we should be looking at that, using more energy, and like you said, if it gets colder, we actually need the energy to stay warm, right? If it gets too hot, then that's, like I said, there are good things to come up with that. Certainly more plant life, and we'll be able to grow more food. So we should be able to have more people on the planet, really, right?
Right. And also, when you're talking about flying cars having emissions, it's kind of like when they talk about the LRT and how, then you won't have car emissions. Well, there was a study by the Cato Institute in around 2008. They looked at the Portland Interstate LRT, and they found that it would take 172 years to recover the greenhouse gas emissions emitted in the making of that short rail line.
Yeah.
So there's huge embedded emissions in all these things that nobody talks about. Yeah.
And again, if you do have questions, please put 3 question marks before. I know there's a lot of people that didn't hear that at the beginning, but if you want to put in your questions again, we can definitely look back through these and see. Some of the stuff that I had. The whole idea of the social credit system. If nobody has actually watched Black Mirror, which is one of those series on Netflix that I used to watch too when I actually had time to watch Netflix. There's an episode on there called Nosedive, and it really does show the dystopian view of what could happen with the social credit. And in one of the scenes, the girl wants to go and get a plane ticket, and she can't get it, so she gets upset, and essentially her credits get knocked down so much that there's no way that she can fly again. And there are those types of stories that deal with that, right?
Yeah, you'll find that also in that book, Sideways, where the guy gives an example that in the smart city, a friend comes to visit, but they have to have a special permit, and then they can't buy food because they don't have the right permit to buy food. And then the other guy gets locked out of his apartment because the power goes down, whatever, everything falls apart because it's all reliant on electricity and this digital ID.
So in your research, looking through these 50-minute cities, what is your take on how would they keep us in our neighborhoods? Would it really just be they've got the cameras, they know where we are, they're tracking us, and they will link everything to digital ID? Like, what would be the actual end result of them keeping us in our homes, for lack of a better word?
Well, again, it depends on the neighborhood and how it's designed and built. But, if it were a modern neighborhood with all the Internet of Things, I mean, they literally could lock down the houses if they were smart locks on the houses. But
that's true too. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
But let's assume that they're going to go with existing buildings and not necessarily smart homes, although that's shown in one of their videos.
Yeah.
But let's say you have robo-dogs. You have robot dogs surveilling, running the neighborhood, or robo-cops, right? And, this changes things considerably. I mean, when I think of defund the police and that whole big campaign, I'm thinking, wow, so you bring in robo-cops. Yeah. They don't have any moral judgment.
No, that's right.
And, it's not like with a regular police officer where you might be able to say, look, I'm sorry, my mom's in the hospital. I was speeding. I didn't mean to, but, I really got to, and he might have some compassion and might even take you to the hospital. You know what I mean? Yeah. Where it's a RoboCop, you were over the limit, or you're trying to get out of this gate and the gate is locked and there's a curfew tonight. Yeah. You'd be tasered or whatever, or a robot dog. I mean, you don't need big infrastructure to actually tie people down. And these are things that we don't think about. And on the surface, it might sound good. And, actually they have a robo dog already working in New York City, I think. And recently they were planning on using RoboCops in San Francisco who could use deadly force on people on the street.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that changes things considerably.
Yeah.
But these things don't need they don't need a pension plan, right? They can work 24/7.
I was just gonna say they don't need sleep. That's for sure. Yeah.
Right. And then you have to ask yourself, well, are these pension funds of the city invested in these solutions as well? Yeah. Are they double, triple, quadruple dipping? When they're pushing for renewables, are they in the background? Are their pension funds through maybe mutual funds? Are they invested in the very things that they're recommending that we buy for our cities that will put up our power prices for us little people, but will enrich their pension fund? But we won't know about that, right? It'll be like skimming.
Yeah. There's actually a few questions that have asked about, are we at risk of losing any investments? Do you have any advice on that? And again, we are not financial experts at all, right? So we would speculate a lot of stuff. And I know the thing about government, the way the government works is, people rely on government to give them all the answers. And unfortunately, they're just regular people that are like, if you're the leader of a government, maybe you're a minister, all you're really doing is you're relying on experts to give you the knowledge, and then basically take a path and decide where to go. And I think that's something that people should realize, that they're influenced by lobbyists, they're influenced by these subject matter experts that are coming in, and they're telling them that this is the direction that they should go. So even before COVID, people were looking at solutions to, maybe greening a city, maybe making travel less, or maybe less cars on the road. And all of these sounded like great ideas. And so, you present that to your government official, your city official, and they'll think this is a great idea. But now when we're looking back at it, we go, holy, are you kidding me? This is exactly what they wanted to do. So I think it is important that most people do get involved. And I know there was Thurhild County up in northern Alberta that basically went back and said, we do not want this different land use to come in. And then they fought it, right? And I think that's what people need to do. We've been so complacent for so long and not into politics that people that had that knowledge manipulated their way in. And now we're all just kind of going, now what do we do? Well, get involved. Absolutely.
Yeah, and not only that, in cities especially, cities usually also have a pretty big family of academics, many of whom are very idealistic and utopian in their thinking. And there's also a really well organized climate hubs in almost every city. These are Al Gore's climate hubs. They're related to the Climate Reality Group. And then what they've done is, like in Calgary, for instance, there's the Calgary Alliance for the Common Good. So they've got together all of the faith groups in town, a couple of the unions, a number of sort of citizen groups, and they all make pitches to City Hall. And, with a city, like, your ward counselor is actually in your ward, right? You probably know the guy or girl, right? You went to school with them maybe. So it's quite approachable. And municipal governments lack that extra level of supervision that a provincial or federal government generally has, where there's an auditor general, where there's a budget department, a policy department, where things, really have to be kind of reviewed by more eyes than the person who knows the neighbor.
Yeah.
So those activists have really infiltrated City Hall.
Yeah. So what would your suggestion be if, we just said get involved, but what would your suggestion be if your neighborhood or your city or town basically squeezed through this whole 15-minute city and all of a sudden now you've got towers up and it looks like they've got cameras on them? Like, what would your recommendation be? Just move? I don't like it. It's such a weird, again.
Well, again, you have to, I think some of the things that people are trying to do have a place, and it's not all, tinfoil hat.
That. No, you're right.
It's not all this, right?
Yeah.
Some of them are practical and useful, but you have to understand what the limitations are and, what are they doing with the data that they're gathering and who's in charge of it. And so it's, you really have to sit on them and find out what's really going on. And unfortunately, most people don't have that time. People who are working don't have the time to go and hang out at City Hall or City Council meetings and, blah, blah, blah. So, that's really the problem, that these activist groups have that time. They have the organization. They often have talking points that they've been given by their kind of higher body. And they're real zealots. Most of us are not zealots. I would say most people on the small c conservative side or the libertarian side of life, we don't want to impose our view on other people. We think there should be open civil debate and a rational discussion and a cost benefit analysis and, and then we decide. But the zealots don't think that way. They don't want to hear what you have to say. They definitely want to keep you out of the conversation with cancel culture and cost benefit analysis. Well, it's an existential crisis. How can you talk about the economy at a time like this? So it becomes a real street theater thing, and you have to be willing to confront that and copy what they do even. I went down to City Hall in 2020, I think it was, with a little sign in Swedish. And I did a video on the steps of City Hall calling for Sundays for Climate Reason, just like Greta Thunberg.
Oh, yeah.
So, you have to be willing to take their memes and flip them on them, right?
Yeah.
See how they like it.
So again, there was a lot of comments based on what books did you have and can you do that? We're going to put this, well, first of all, number one is this webinar ends up getting saved and you guys can go back after this is done. It takes just a couple of minutes and then you can go back and scroll through this anytime. But we're also going to put the link to the presentation that Michelle had. So you should be able to go in and take a look at those exact books anyways, right?
Right.
That's the plan. So I think that would be a good thing to do. And then that way we don't have people asking, what was the name of the book and all that. Let's just kind of wrap up here. So is there any last little thoughts that you want to kind of talk about how this would relate back to the whole premise that we do these things for Alberta Prosperity Project, right? We talk about, you know, the what Alberta can do in terms of independence, in terms of a referendum. How would you relate that back to this presentation?
Well, I would say, first of all, that Alberta is in a relatively strong position because we have pretty much everything that we need here in Alberta.
Yeah.
We have lots of good cropland, good farmers, and we have all the energy resources that we need, and we have money.
Yeah.
We have a lot of smart people, we have a lot of hardworking people, and we have people who love Alberta.
Yeah.
So they're willing to stand and defend. So those are all really positive things.
Yeah.
Up against that, we also have very well-funded environmental groups, foreign funded and domestically funded, and they're very organized, and we're not that organized as groups of people. So I think the most fundamental important thing is to remember that the human rights, the civil rights that we enjoy, are deeply rooted in our culture, back to the Magna Carta, back to the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen in France after the Revolution, and back to the UN Declaration of Human Rights. These are deeply embedded in our culture and should not be given away easily or taken away easily. So one of the most important things is to stand up and say no. So challenge things that are infringing on your freedoms, and do it in a, you know, I would say polite way, but a firm way. Like, first be firm and then be blunt. Like, no, we're not giving this up. And I think arm yourself with some of this information, because it's you know, really a complex, messy web of things that most of us never think about. I mean, a lot of the things I presented tonight, they're not things that I ever learned about in school. You know, they're things that I learned about by following the money mostly, and going, what? You know, it ends up here?
That's exactly right. Yeah. And for the viewers out there, like, please do share. And again, you know, we do these webinars every Wednesday. We also do chapter meetings. We do provincial meetings. You can find out more information on that through albertaprosperityproject.com. And I wanted to let you know that next week's webinar is something that Michelle is probably going to be quite interested in as well. And it's actually on Bill C-11 and just transition, and so much more. And it's with Chris Sims, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. And for those of you that don't know, that C-11 is what used to be the Broadcasting Act. Now it's called I guess it is. It's the Online Streaming Act. Broadcasting Act, I think, is part of that. And that has, which would change Canada's broadcasting policy, and it gives new powers to Canada's broadcasting regulator, along with a lot of other stuff. So, in other words, if the CRTC or whoever is the regulator at the time, or whatever they call it with all their acronyms, if they didn't like what we were presenting tonight, that would be it. They'd shut us down. They could fine us. They could haul us off to jail. They could do lots of things. So C-11 is a big thing. And of course, the just transition, which is what Danielle Smith was talking with Trudeau and a bunch of others. It's basically legislation to help workers in the oil and gas sector move into green energy jobs. So, you know, someone that's gone through school to be a pipe fitter, or they're working up north on the energy, and so now they're going to learn how to do something else that's more green, or maybe they'll just end up being moved into a Walmart greeter. I'm not even sure what the actual plan is, but anyways, we're talking about that next Wednesday. So please view us again next Wednesday. And so right now, Michelle, thank you so much again for such a great presentation. And it's definitely stuff that people should be passing on, and have these conversations with other people in your neighborhood, your family, your friends, people in your neighborhood, because we're so used to not used to, but I mean, the last few years, we just have stayed away from those uncomfortable topics. We have stayed away from politics and religion, and we have to get back to that. And we've said that numerous times, that people, they just don't like the uncomfortable topics, but we're in uncomfortable times. So now this is really what we should be doing right now. So.
Yeah, and just remember, you don't want to eat crickets. Right?
True.
I have mine here.
Do you?
Yeah. So you don't want to eat crickets, but rough times are ahead. But don't be afraid.
Yeah.
Stand and fight.
That's right. Absolutely. Well, that was the interview with Michelle Stirling from Friends of Science back in February of 2023, about 16 months ago. And as I was going through that, so I filled up yet another sheet of paper, things that have changed or that we should at least be talking about that. And we're already into 2 hours and 5 minutes into this webinar. I'm going to try and wrap things up in about 10 minutes or so. So if you don't mind sticking around and listening to some of the stuff that I have to say in regards to the presentations and what has actually changed in those 16 years, and what things we can do. Maybe let's talk about a little bit about that too. So I just want to bring up a couple of the things too. We basically hooked you by calling this about the 15-minute city and what's happening in Edmonton. And of course, if you are a little bit well versed, you probably already know the site on edmonton.ca, talking about the planning, showing the maps of what's going on, et cetera, et cetera. I think I've even got one in here. There's I've tried my best to go through and relisted the books and maybe even links to things throughout. I'll compile that after the fact and post them again. But there's a whole document here on fostering 15-minute communities in Edmonton, blah, blah, blah. We've already gone through all that. They're trying to really make it look like everything is all hunky-dory, kind of makes sense, just like we were talking about. But then even one of my comments was things are good until they're not so good. And one of the papers was about online conspiracy theories about the Edmonton's 15-minute plan. It's just absolute nonsense. And the only way it's actually going to stay as absolute nonsense is if we get involved and we say it's absolute nonsense. And with that, I want to show you that just happened June 25th. Edmonton Council passes the district policy. It basically clarifies freedom of movement amid 15-minute city fears. So basically, the government has already said, oh, don't worry, everything will be fine. We will not permit this to happen. But any policy that can happen can also be taken away. So we need to be putting pressure on, which kind of leads me to another scenario that we're all familiar with here in Calgary, was the Recall Gondek movement. And what was partially in there? Well, it was about the rezoning for housing. So I actually, while this was going on, I did a Google search to see if I could find out what. They ended up doing a series of hearings, and I think it almost took 2 weeks to go through, in which people would go, concerned citizens would go in and say, yeah, I want the rezoning, or no, I don't want the rezoning. And as from what I could tell, 75% of the people were against the rezoning, and yet it still passed. So despite the fact that we are saying, no, this is what we want, we don't want any of this happening, they still pushed it through. So there has to be accountability with your counselor, and even if it ended up being provincial and the federal level, you have to get involved with them. And what's the best way is to vote them out. However, you still have to wait 4 years to vote them out. So that is a bit of an issue. So I had that down as my notes. The last little thing I forgot to edit out of that section, but maybe it's a good thing that I didn't. I was talking about next week's webinar already, and that was, again, from February of 2023, in which we were going to talk about C11 with Chris Sims. Well, as you know, C11 didn't go through exactly the way that we had thought. However, now we've got C63, C63, which is the Online Harms Act. So if one doesn't get through, the government is trying to push through yet another one. So these are the things that we need to be involved with and really be involved with. Like, make sure that you're, check your Twitter feed or go onto the city, provincial, federal websites. And it's up to us. We need to be policing what's going on. And it's funny that I actually use the word policing, because I don't know if you guys know this as well. We were talking about doing policing and defunding the policing. And if you haven't heard this just came out 2 days ago. Alberta to launch permanent residence pathway for police officers. So essentially, if you're a landed immigrant, I'll just say that in terms of the context of this, and if you want to become a permanent resident, all you need to do is sign up to be a police officer. And if you're able to be a police officer, then you can have all the benefits of being a permanent resident in Canada, including voting. So think about that, and make sure that you get a hold of your local counselor, your whatever you need to do. Here's a good comment here. Holy crap, that is crazy. They don't give a crap. They're pushing here through their agenda, though whether we like it or not. They're organized, and we don't give a shit about us. It doesn't matter if we police. If we need to separate now. Well, I'm certainly on board with that, Connie, and we need to educate people. So again, stuff that you learn from these webinars, or stuff that you just learn even just talking family, friends. I mean, that's what we're talking about, is just getting involved. And how do you get involved? Well, maybe you can't be part of the police force. Maybe you can't be part of municipal government, but you can definitely be involved in your neighborhood and your family. Let them know what's going on. So that is a couple of things that those are things that since this all happened 16 months ago, things have changed a little bit more. Let me just see if I can find one or two more different things. A couple of stats. I'm not even going to put them up on the screen. Alberta does spend $26.2 billion on healthcare in 2024. That is roughly 40 to 45% of the tax base that comes into here. We are in the top quartile on cost, but yet we are on the bottom quartile of quality of care. And how do we get by that? Well, if we're spending money, we should be getting care back. And we, again, get involved. We have to tell people, and it's one thing to complain. I go into the little bars that I deal with in terms of my jukeboxes and arcade games and stuff. There's always a table of old guys, which I'm going to be very, very soon. Table of old guys, and that's all that they do, is they complain and they say, this is the way we should change the city, or change the province, or change whatever. And I've walked up to a couple of them, and of course they look at me and they just laugh. And I said, well, have you guys got involved? You guys are coming up with great ideas here, but you're not actually involved. And yet not one of them has really stepped up and said anything. Of course, every time I see them, they always say, hey, oh, it's that guy again. But it is one of those things that, I think everyone wants to get involved, or maybe not. Maybe nobody wants to get involved. Maybe they're just happy doing nothing. And I can't be like that. I just feel like I need to get involved with something. One more thing too, Alberta pension. So of course we are doing the pension, and I do seem to be a little bit more involved than I was 16 months ago. And I kind of know how the pension money goes through. It's basically a pay to play system. Money goes in, money goes out. The little bit that's left is the stuff that actually gets invested, which is still billions of dollars. And each year it gets invested, so it grows to this giant amount of money. And, we were talking about being $800 billion in shortfall. And again, those were in 2019 numbers. Now, if we're looking at this, if you go to one of our meetings, we're 1.2 trillion in a shortfall. What does that mean for you, and what does it mean for me? Well, it basically means that, there's a couple of things that we can do in order to make up that shortfall. Number one is raise our pension premiums. If you needed to do that with a CPP, raise our pension premiums as CPP. You could also bring in immigration, bring in more people to put money into the CPP system. The other one, which is kind of morbid, is just not to have as many pensioners collecting, if you know what I mean. So those are three ways that I guess the government is realistically looking at all this. So it's a little scary when you look at that, and which is another reason why I'm involved in the pension. And of course, the other thing that was brought up in here, and again, looking at this now as opposed to 16 months ago, we were talking about climate bonds. Climate bonds meant nothing to me 16 months ago. Now looking at it in terms of pension, that is a big thing. So we got ESG scores, we got the bonds that are going to be going through, because that's where the money is in climate capture and all that, CO2, net zero, etc. If we had our own Alberta pension, maybe we just say, you know what, we're not agreeing to ESG, we're not agreeing to anything that deals with climate change. We are going to maybe we fund our own projects, maybe we fund stuff that's happening in Canada, although it sounds like a lot of stuff that is actually making money is happening outside of Canada, maybe in the US, maybe in foreign markets. Again, I'm not a financial guy whatsoever, but dealing with the pension funds, this stuff does make sense to me now, looking at it with fresh eyes. So I'm glad I did this webinar and reposted it, and I hope you guys got a little bit out of this and what's changed in 16 months. I'd hate to go back in another 16 months and see what happens based on 32 months of what are we going on. So yeah, a couple of comments here. Stone, you always have the comments. We're in an abusive relationship. What choice do we have? Well, you can get out of the marriage if you needed to, right? That's what I would essentially do. Cliff says that initiative is just disgusting. Everyone should phone their MLA and let them know you don't agree. And I agree. I absolutely agree. And we say this all the time. Get involved and phone your municipal and your provincial and your MP, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have a track record of Calgary rezoning, right? That is still not over, though. The Calgary rezoning is still not over. They're still looking at doing some sort of legal action, or if worst case scenario is we just get rid of Gondek, but then does somebody else just come in? Maybe we'll have Roy Bayer on to talk a little bit more about what his plans are in terms of a municipal party. Is a municipal party a good idea? Well, at least then you're voting for a party that may have similar views that you're looking for. I don't know if that's a great idea, but maybe we'll have Roy on to discuss the pros and cons of that too. So maybe just a couple more questions or a couple more comments. Connie says, we vote people into government to protect us as well. So what is the Alberta government doing to stop these 15-minute cities? It's a very good question. When was the last time you talked to your MLA about it? I don't know. Hey, when you can talk to your MLA? Good segue. Thank you, Connie. You could talk to your MLA by going to, I'm going to do this really professional like. It's a little slower than I wanted to. By going to freedomcalendar.net and then seeing what's coming up. And guess what's coming up? There is a Freedom Talk happening in Red Deer at the Red Deer Resort and Casino. And you know who's there? Michelle Stirling, who you just saw on the webinar. She's going to be speaking there. Mark Morano, John Robson, David Redmond, Lieutenant Colonel David Redmond, who I would like to have on here to talk about the COVID, basically what they should have done in terms of a pandemic response, and they did not. Tanya Gaw, Stockwell Day, Maxime Bernier, Patrick Moore, who again, climate, we've trying to get him on, and I think we'll actually get a couple of other people on. Andrew Lawton from True North, Matea Murda, and Brian Lee Crowley. Though that's this weekend. And if you want to go, just go to freedomcalendar.net. You can just search. Let me just go back here. I'm just going to show you how to find it. Really easy. Our good buddy Max puts this together. Amazing guy, amazing involvement. Just look at the next events, and you will see everything that's going to be coming up, including our pension events as well. Just click on that diagram right there, and you will see what's happening on the 2 days. 2 days events, and that is taking place in Red Deer. That is one thing that you can do to get involved, and you will be able to talk to people that are involved in politics as well as possibly your own MLA. So I think that's all enough rambling for tonight. I'm tired, and it's 20 after. No, it's 20 after 9. So you guys have. I hope you learned a lot. I definitely do every time I do this, and I really enjoy doing these. And I really enjoy when, especially like at the Whistle Stop this weekend, and people come up and they say, "Great job." We learn a lot, and that's kind of what the whole point is that we want to educate and get people involved, and it's up to us. We can make the change that we need to do, and if we want to be sovereign and if we want to be independent, then that's what we should try and do. So with that, I'm going to say good night, everybody, and you guys have an amazing weekend. Again, to our neighbors to the south, have a great Independence Day. Calgary Stampedes this week, and we'll be walking around doing some pension partitions at the breakfasts. Which one I'll be at, I have no idea. I don't even know what I'm doing tomorrow, but that's just the way it is. But again, you guys have an amazing week, and we will see you next Wednesday. And don't forget, next Tuesday, I'm actually hosting an Alberta First Pension webinar with Tanner Naday and Mitch Sylvester. So with that, you guys have an awesome weekend, and we'll see you later.